Now, you should all be able to see my screen. Kieran Walsh is my name. I'm Clinical Director at BMJ, and I've worked in medical education, clinical decision support, and quality improvement for over 10 years now, and also in e-learning. I'm going to talk about how to write a paper that editors will want to publish. Of course, it's relevant to quality improvement. It's also relevant to if you were doing research or if you were writing a commentary or an editorial. The principles are largely the same. It's relevant if you're an author or if you're a peer reviewer or if you're a mentor. And as Vikram said, I'll ask you some questions as we go and at the end, and hopefully we'll have lots of times for Q&A at the very end. So I'll be asking you to use the chat as we go. So the first question is why get published? And there's lots of potential reasons as to why. You may have something important to say. You might want to share your work, promote thought, etc., etc. I won't read all of these out. They're all valid reasons, but in the world of quality improvement, of course, changing practice is most important, as is sharing your work. The idea of BMJ Open Quality originally, when it was first launched 10 years ago, was to enable healthcare professionals who were planning to do quality improvement to see whether similar quality improvement projects were done elsewhere and whether they could learn from them and sometimes reproduce them in their own setting. What do editors want? And this is true of almost any journal, of course, true of quality improvement journals as well, but they want work that's important, that has the potential to improve decision making, that's relevant to a particular audience. And in this case, it's an interprofessional audience because we know quality improvement is a team-based activity. So do think about how your work might be relevant to doctors and nurses and pharmacists or allied healthcare professionals. Of course, they want original work as well. And also, ideally, editors want the wow factor, but the wow factor is really quite rare and only comes along every now and then. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But the things I would think about continually is the work original, and is it and state that, and is it important, and why, and is it academically rigorous in whatever field we're talking about, be it quality improvement or original research or clinical research or whatever. And important begs the question, important to who? But most BMJ journals, including BMJ Open Quality, is a generalist journal. So we're not talking about educating or reaching out to super specialists in particular niche specialties. We're interested in talking to generalist physicians and GPs or family doctors or whatever. So these are the things you should be thinking about. But even more important than that, to get published, there's a film from a few years ago now, I think it's the 1980s, in fact, called Throw Mama from the Train. And it's about a writer who has writer's block, and he has a writer's coach. And the writer's coach says to him repeatedly, a writer's right. If you want to get published, you need to write up your work and submit it to a medical journal. And of course, it seems enormously obvious. But at the same time, I talk to people who do amazing quality improvement work in their own local institution. And I ask them, did you get it published? Did you think about submitting it? And they didn't. Some people who even do PhDs, and yet the chapters in the PhDs, they're certainly publishable, but they haven't submitted it to a journal. So you need to write it up and submit it to a journal, and that requires discipline, and it also requires planning. and planning is all important. And I always encourage people to plan from the start, and also to start writing from the start. And whether that's a quality improvement project you're doing, or a PhD, or whatever. Too often I talk to people who say, oh, the reason I haven't got published is because I left it all to the end and I ran out of time. So I encourage people to start writing at the start. So to take a leaf out of clinical research rather than quality improvement research, but say if you were doing a clinical research article, then once you or clinical research study, from when you start, you can write the introduction, because that's not going to change. You can write the methodology, because that's not going to change as well. You can even start to write up the results, but just not add in the results yet, you know. So I really encourage people to plan and get going from the very start. When writing a paper, it can't be emphasized enough to read the journal, to read the instructions for authors, which are on all medical journals, including, of course, BMJ Open Quality, and to follow them to the letter. Many journals have a rapid reject zone, whereby they get a submission, and for some reason it's not right or not in the right format, and it's automatically rejected. It can't be accepted for the journal. And often when I see it, it's because people haven't read the instructions for authors. I also, every year, I peer review for poster abstracts for our quality forum, and I read through the poster abstracts, and often it's clear from what people have submitted and what they've written that they haven't read the instructions for authors, and they can't be accepted. Also think about the format. BMJ Open Quality, like all journals, accepts different types of articles. And your article doesn't have to be research, but the principles of good writing and good planning are largely the same, whether it's a research study or quality improvement report or a commentary or whatever. So I'm now going to open it up. We said that this would be an interactive session, and I'm going to ask you to enter into the chat box what you think are the top 3 things that an editor looks at when they first receive a paper, and when a paper arrives in their inbox. So if you can enter into the chat box the top 3 things that editors look at. I'm just going to stop sharing now. So some people have said the title, of course, which is important. Methodology, the introduction, whether it's an original idea. Yeah, absolutely. All that's important. And one person has said letter, cover letter. Yeah. Should people write to all panelists, or all panelists attend? I think you write to all, please. The language of the presentation, the relevance, the content. So all these things are absolutely relevant. Thank you. So thanks for taking part in that. I'm going to go back to my presentation. And so what do... So here are the things that, here are the things that an editor looks at. They look at the title, the cover letter, the abstract, and then the paper. And many of the title is obvious, and most of you got that. The abstract is also fairly obvious as well. A few people mentioned the cover letter, and that's really important. and it's important to spend some time on it. And I've got to emphasize this, that a lot of papers are screened by an editor or peer reviewers on their title, their cover letter, and the abstract. And if the editor looks at these things and says, you know, these are not right for the journal, then they won't get as far as reading your entire paper. So you need to spend time on these things because they're the first impression that you'll make on the editor. So the cover letter is really much neglected, and what you want to say in your cover letter is what I said a few slides ago. Dear editor, this work is original for whatever reason. Maybe it's original in this setting. It's hard to be completely original, but it must be original in some way. It's important educationally. It's practice changing. In what way? And it's academically rigorous. We followed good practice in quality improvement methodology in this way, ABC, in doing the quality improvement work. And therefore, we'd be grateful for you to consider the paper. And I always say to people, spend some time on the cover letter. People often leave the cover letter till last, and they've written up a few thousand words, and they've worked their way all through Manuscript Central, and then a little box comes up and it says you need to submit a cover letter, and they don't really do justice to it. And sometimes they say, please find attached. Or sometimes they say that they don't say anything at all. They leave it blank, which is a missed opportunity. Or sometimes they say this is a first draft, which most editors don't really have time to look at that. And I would say, encourage you in your cover letter to point out the strengths of your paper. Don't overdo it or oversell it too much. But because the editor won't really believe if you exaggerate the benefits of your paper or the unique qualities of your paper or whatever. But do write a little bit about why the paper and why the paper is right for the journal, because the editor will then be really, really keen to read on and to read the abstract and to read the rest of the paper. Then think about the title. And there are different types of titles. You can have a descriptive title, number of heads in adults, audit. You can have a declarative title. You can have a journalistic, engaging title. You can have a questioning title. And here, once again, I would say, carefully check the journal's instructions to authors and see what type of titles do they want. And sometimes they have a word count or a character count to titles. And often often you will be able to learn from other titles of other articles that have been accepted, and you will see what type of titles do they really like. Is it descriptive or questioning or whatever? And then follow their lead. So a couple of years ago, one of the specialist journals in the BMJ, I think it was Archives of Disease of Childhood, was covered in the lay press in the UK. And what the paper was about ADHD and conduct disorder amongst children in the UK. And you can see in the second bullet point there what the paper really found. But at the top, welcome to Yob UK, that's how the lay press reported it. And I'm not suggesting that you follow a completely journalistic style, but what I am saying is look at the journal that you're submitting to. What type of titles do they like? Spend a little bit of time on it. It's the first thing the editor will look at. Then, of course, there's the abstract. Usually there's a word count. Usually you're expected to write a structured abstract for most journals now. Keep it simple. use an active voice when you can. Once again, spend time on it. There's such a thing as the 80-20 principle, which many of you will be familiar with, and it says that 20% of our efforts results in 80% of our results, and that's certainly true in title, abstract, and cover letter. And remember again and again that the editors will screen your paper often screen your paper by looking at the title, the abstract, and the cover letter. So do pay attention to these things. Often it will be the only part of the study that will be read. Editors may screen papers by reading only the abstracts. And there's different types of structure to an abstract. And here's, could be the IMRAD structure, could be this structure, which the BMJ expects. And of course, quality improvement journals, including BMJ Open Quality, have their own structures as well. There's lots of resources out there on how to get published. Here's just one, BMJ Research to Publication, which is an e-learning resource aimed at authors, editors, and peer review. And it takes you through all you need to know about how to get published, from planning your study in the first place through to navigating through peer review. And it's just one resource, but there's lots of other resources, and I'll just take a second to click through some of them. There's the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, ICMJE website, recommendations for manuscripts submitted to biomedical journals. It's freely available. The Equator Network, which is something I'll come back to, is freely available. It's COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, it's freely available website. These things are really worth looking at and spend timing on, because you learn a massive amount from them. So here's the ICMJE website, and it's extremely useful. Now, different types of papers have different structures. One structure is the IMRAD structure, and I know quality improvement reports have a slightly different structure, but I think what I'll show you over the next few slides are relevant, and the principles largely remain the same. So I'm going to run through all of these one by one. So first of all, the introduction. And in writing up your introduction, I think the key things are don't write too much, write 3 or 4 paragraphs at a max. Don't go too much over the word limit. Write what's known or not known on the research question. Don't write too much. And then summarize the research question in the last paragraph of the introduction and say why the question matters. And then you've done your introduction. The errors that you sometimes see in introductions is that they're too long, or the people write about every possible research article in detail that they've ever read. Only think about the relevant research and what's known or not known on the research question before you start. Then there's the methods, and this is like a recipe, and it's the most important section for informed readers who are really going to analyze your methodology. And I think the key 2 or 3 things to say here is follow reporting guidelines. So for randomized controlled trials, it's the consort statement. For quality improvement reports, it's the SQUARE guidelines, and we'll come back to the SQUARE guidelines at the end. And the key thing about it is to not only follow them, but state in your methodology that you're writing up your report according to the SQUARE guidelines. And the editor, when they see that, they'll immediately feel reassured that you know the basics about how to write up a quality improvement report. And even if your paper or your quality improvement project isn't perfect, or you didn't achieve absolutely all the results that you expected, they'll be reassured that at least your methodology is sound. Of course, describe measures to ensure ethical conduct. That's basic to be expected. And I'm just going to jump over a couple of these slides as well. But of course, if doing research, the study design should be the best for answering the particular research question. If you're doing research in quality improvement, if it's a quality improvement project or report that you're writing up, it will be different. And here's the Equator Network, the web address there at the very top. There's a wealth of information on the Equator Network, and I'm continually surprised that people don't use it more often. It's all freely available, and it's worth looking at the very start of your quality improvement project or your study, rather than just when you're writing it up, because often when you're writing it up, it can be too late. You can't go back and change things or do things again. So this is about planning from the very start. So more about the Equator Network here is again, and often the reporting guidelines come with a checklist, and you can tick off the checklist and sometimes upload it as an additional resource alongside your manuscript, once again, to demonstrate to the editorial teams or the peer reviewers that you followed good practice in reporting your quality improvement project or your paper. Statistical analysis, I'll skip through this. Ethics. So ethics, of course, are really important. And I'm continually asked, well, what degree of ethics approval might you need? And of course, it depends from country to country and from institution to institution. And but regardless of that, if there are human participants in this, then they should consent. That you should do your best to respect confidentiality and anonymity of participants if that's required, and to answer all these questions. How much does the study deviate from current normal practice? What burden was imposed? What were the risks and benefits? How much society and future patients benefits, etc., etc., etc. And then it'll get on to results, and it's important to report results as fully and honestly as you could, as possible, and to report it in a mixture of text, but ideally, if tables add value, then use tables. If figures add value, use figures as well. It'll bring your results and your paper to light. But please do leave out non-essential tables and figures. Only add them in if they really do add value. And then it comes down to discussion. And here, don't simply repeat the introduction. Think about a statement of principal findings. Think about the strengths and weaknesses of the study and point these out before the editor or peer reviewer do, and explain what you've done to mitigate any potential weaknesses. Explain what the possible implications might be for your study for the field of quality improvement, or for clinicians or policymakers. There may sometimes be unanswered questions and future research, and you might need to address that. But one thing I would caution against is that sometimes when writing up the discussion or conclusions or the final part of your paper, people can have a tendency to get carried away and to say this is groundbreaking piece of work and it will transform practice, etc., etc. And only rarely, really, only rarely do papers like that really transform a field, and only every once every couple of years. So always be cautious in your discussion and in your conclusions and in stating what the implications of your findings might be. I'm just going to pause for a second because somebody raised a hand, and so I can't remember who did raise their hands, but if somebody may have a question, so please do. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Dr. Ashna, can you just unmute Dr. Kakkar, who has just raised her hand?
Yes, sir. Done.
And
Sanjay
Dr. Prabha also. Yeah.
Yeah, and Prabha, Dr. Prabha can also speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. I have questions about, I may ask this question later on, sir, because sir has not completed his presentation.
Okay,
by mistake, I raised my hand.
Okay, that's okay.
Okay.
So we have Dr. Prabha Kakkar. Dr. Aarti Maria. Yes, Dr. Aarti, please. And then Dr. Prabha. Yeah. Dr. Aarti, can you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
I think I also by mistake.
Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. That's fine. Karen, can you please?
About that.
Yeah, can you please continue?
Okay,
Yeah.
no problem. Yeah, that's grand. Good. Thank you. Good. So this is just a light touch to add to the presentation. This is from the Book of Kells on the left, which is an ancient Irish manuscript, where the people who were writing it all up, and there were monks living in the west of Ireland, and they were, as they were writing up the Book of Kells, they wrote little doodles to themselves or little notes to themselves or to their colleagues, saying things like, that's a hard page and a weary work to write it, the ink is thin, etc., etc., or oh my hand. So writing can be hard work, and this is something I think that was a paper submitted to BMJ a few years ago. Sentences that you'll probably never read in a published paper, even though we'd love to read sentences like this, such as we were totally surprised at work, or we're only doing this to get tenure, etc., etc. Now, many journals require the authors to state in each research paper a transparency declaration, whereby the lead author affirms that this paper is an honest, accurate, and transparent account of the study, that no important aspects of the study have been omitted, that they've explained any discrepancies from the original plan of the study, and that comes from the manuscript's guarantor. Clear writing is really most important, and here's some principles of clear writing. At BMJ, we say never use a metaphor or simile or figure of speech when you can just explain in plain language what you're trying to say. Use short words, use short sentences, use simple words. Editing is all about cutting out words, and so if it's possible to cut out a word, always cut it out. Use active voice rather than passive voice, and never use a foreign phrase or a Latinism or a classical allusion or anything like that when you can spell it out in plain English. That's what BMJ journals are all about. They're all about accessibility. And also, it's important to remember that medicine and quality improvement, all aspects of medicine, are increasingly specialized. And so the editor and peer reviewers of this journal may not be an expert in your particular specialty. So do think about your audience and spell things out and make things clear. And keep it simple and avoid cliches like this and avoid phrases like this, such as there are no prior published studies of this topic. Like that's unlikely to be the case. Authorities agree that when what you really mean is I think, or it is well known that, once again, what you're really saying is I think, you know, at this moment in time, just say currently or now. Use fewer words and keep it simple. And this is from Rudyard Kipling from 6 Honest Serving Men. I keep 6 honest serving men. Their names are what, why, and when, and how, and where, and who. And that's principles of good writing, regardless of whether you're writing a story or writing a review article or writing a quality improvement project. Think about these things and how you kind of answer these questions that people might have about your paper. So I put this in here and I want you all to read it, and I'm going to pause again for a second. I'll just let you read it for a second. And now I'm going to stop sharing, and what I want you to do is to add into the search box what the writer is really saying there. Add into the chat. What was the writer saying there? So very good. You've got it all already. I'll stop and share again. Of course, yeah, absolutely, you're right. The cow jumped over the moon from the nursery rhyme. But in medicine and in healthcare, when we're writing things up, for some reason, I don't know why, from medical school onwards, we try and make things unnecessarily complicated. Use the passive voice, use long, complicated scientific words, when often we don't need to. And BMJ is about accessibility, plain, simple language. I'll skip some of these slides here. And some tips about good writing. Generally, one idea per sentence is a good idea. Several short, simple sentences are usually much clearer than one long sentences with multiple subclauses. The active voice is better, more direct, more easily understood, and often more concise as well. The passive voice is often difficult to understand, so we discourage it. And we encourage authors to use evidence-based writing. So rather than saying things are certain diseases are common or rare, state what the incidence or prevalence of those diseases are. Rather than saying that a diagnostic test is accurate, state precisely what are the sensitivity and specificity or negative predictive value or positive predictive value, etc., etc. Try not to say that a disease has a good prognosis or a poor prognosis. Say what the risks of complications are, or death is, or the chances of remission, etc., etc. And try and be explicit about the levels of evidence that you're citing, and whether you're talking in terms of risk, whether you're talking about relative or absolute risk reduction, and number needed to treat. And indeed, we tend to avoid relative risk reduction and much prefer absolute risk reduction. And then you've written up your paper or your quality improvement report, and before submitting it, you will need to review it and spend some time with this. Don't leave things to the last minute if at all possible. And that means rereading it yourself, sharing it with your co-authors and ensuring that they read it and sign it off. Share it with expert colleagues in the department or in neighboring departments, perhaps, who will be able to give you a second or third opinion on it and advise you on it, and particularly about how understandable it is for somebody who's not an expert in this field. And sometimes good to share it with non-expert colleagues as well. So try and get as many kind of eyes on your paper before you submit it as possible, because then they will pick up errors and advise you on them, and you'll be able to fix them before it gets as far as the editor and before it gets as far as the peer reviewer. And then it will come time to submit. Give yourself time, whether it's Manuscript Central or another type of electronic submission system. It takes a little bit of time to get your paper through the system. Try and gather everyone's details beforehand, otherwise you'll realize, oh, I need to add my co-authors' titles and place of work and qualifications, etc., and it's easier to gather up all of this beforehand so that it's to hand when you're actually submitting it on the electronic submission system. An electronic submission system is hard the first time you do it, but actually when you're submitting your next paper to that journal, maybe a year down the line, it will recognize you and often recognize many of your co-authors from the first time, and it'll be much faster the second time. So bear with it. Think about what journal you're going to choose and who the audience of the journal is, whether it's generalists or specialists, national or international, and think about the impact, which is more than just the impact factor, and what you want to achieve. Do you want people to read your work? Is open access better? Do you want people to replicate your work, to use your work? Do you want it to reach the public, etc., and allow those questions and your answers to those questions to influence your choice of journal. And a few words about BMJ Open Quality, which has been around, I think, for close to 10 years now. I was lucky to be one of the original people involved in it, along with Ashton McKim, who was the first editor. And what it's trying to do is it's open access, peer-reviewed journal. It was originally, it's actually 8 years, and it was originally called BMJ Quality Improvement Reports, but was expanded then to include lots of different types of papers, as you can see here, from original reports through to systematic and narrative reviews. But still, most of its work is about quality improvement reports. And I won't go into all this because this is all on the website. But this, just to run through this is taken from the SQUARE guidelines from the Equator Network, and it has a massive amount of detail on SQUARE 2.0, how to write up a quality improvement report. The time to read this is before you even start your study, and it goes through introduction, methods, etc. There's really quite a lot of detail, and the closer you can align your report to the SQUARE guidelines, the much better chance you'll have of being published. So whether you're an author or a mentor, do look at the SQUARE guidelines. And there you are. Now, then, after you've submitted, what do you do then? Well, the most important thing you've got to do then is wait. And journals and editors are really busy. They're particularly busy, and it's difficult to find peer reviewers at the moment during the COVID pandemic. and it's affected healthcare around the world. So you got to wait. You can't wait. You can't just submit your paper and contact them a week later and say, are you going to accept it or not? You got to wait, I think, for a month or 6 weeks, probably. You might want to make a polite inquiry if you haven't heard anything, but often you might get an interim report stating that your paper has been entered into processing, or your paper has gone for peer review. Peer review typically takes 2 or 3 weeks at least, so you just need to give it a little bit of time. And then eventually you will get the decision from the editor, which might be, yes, they want to publish your paper. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, your paper is great, we'll publish it as it is. But often they will say, yes, but we want you to make a few changes to the paper if you can. And I always advise people, if you get messages like that, be really quick to respond. You'll often be told you must respond within the next month or 6 weeks or something like that. If you can, respond within days, or respond immediately and saying, yeah, I will get the paper submitted again within the week, and then really go and work on it. Because editors, they want papers and they want authors who are reliable and who are responsive. And if you're an author like that, they'll look favorably upon you. Sometimes you'll get a maybe. And if you get a maybe, once again, I would say, be quick, or answer the peer reviewers' questions or queries, answer them one by one, and explain how you've reviewed the article in light of them. And occasionally you might get a no, a rejection. There might be right of appeal. I'll come back to that in a second. So understanding peer review. There's different types of peer review, just like there are different types of trials. There can be open, single, double-blind peer reviewer, peer reviewing, whereby you might or might not know who the peer reviewer is, or indeed the peer reviewer might or might not know who you as the author is. But it's important to remember that the peer reviewer advises and the editor decides. So don't be too terribly put off. Often a paper will get 2 or 3 peer reviewers. One of them might be more negative than the others. Answer all of the peer reviewers' comments. If you can, try and adjust the paper or incorporate the peer reviewers' suggestions into your paper if you can. If you completely disagree with them, or if you feel they're wrong, or if you feel you can't explain, then politely rebut the peer reviewer's comments and explain why. But go through them one by one. And ultimately it's not the peer reviewer who'll decide whether to publish the paper or not. The editor will decide. I'd encourage all of you to volunteer to become a peer reviewer. You can contact a journal and ask them, are they looking for peer reviewers? Most journals are continually looking for peer reviewers and are short of peer reviewers. And you learn a massive amount from being a peer reviewer, and you learn what the process is like, and you learn common mistakes that other people make when they're submitting their papers, and you'll be able to avoid those yourself. So I encourage everybody to become a peer reviewer. And once again, re-emphasizing things that I said earlier, how to keep editors and peer reviewers happy. Clarity of message in the paper, the abstract and the cover letter, we should be all aligned. Sometimes you might have previous peer review reports and you can always submit them and communicate clearly and also promptly to the editors and peer reviewers. And here's the BMJ peer reviewer process. Now this is from the BMJ, the BMJ, our flagship journal itself. And as you can see, go through multiple processes, and it's really hard to get published in the BMJ. BMJ Open Quality is much higher acceptance rates, as do many of the other specialist journals. And I think this is Gary Larson. Most scientists regarded the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. So once again, do volunteer to become a peer reviewer. So sometimes, and this is more messages here on acceptance rates for journals. And if your paper is rejected, then the thing to do is to inform your co-authors of the paper and then start work really immediately on preparation for the next journal. Consider the feedback from the editors and reviewers of the first journal and use their comments to improve the paper, and do this in line with scope and requirements of the next journal. You might consider appealing. The BMJ does allow appeals, but just one appeal. So make it good. If you're submitting to a new journal, then you can say that it was submitted to a previous journal, and here are the peer review comments from that journal, and hopefully they will accept your paper. It's a mistake just to say, oh, it was rejected by that journal, and then submit it without any changes to a new journal, because it may end up with the same peer reviewers. It can be a small world, the world of biomedical science. So do try and improve your paper. And here's the BMJ Appeals System. And I think these are the last couple of slides, but if rejected, I would say perhaps one of the most important messages is don't give up. And so this is a story about, in the 1950s, I think, in the US, they analyzed salesmen and they found out what makes a successful door-to-door salesman. And they looked at lots of different criteria, and the only criteria they found for a successful salesman is a successful salesman doesn't give up. And you should think about the same with your papers. So I'm lucky I've had lots and lots of papers and of different sorts published in lots of different medical journals, from the BMJ, from medical education, etc., etc. But which is great, but people don't know the number of rejections I've had as well. And it's only through really pressing ahead and resubmitting and continually improving the papers that I've managed to get anything accepted at all. So I really encourage you all never to give up. That's the end of my slides, and I'm going to stop